Welcome to I Love This Thing So Fricking Much, a podcast about passion. My name is Sophie Katz, and today I am joined by Galia, a sex educator, Jewish educator, and bigender bi dyke. Welcome back to the show, Galia.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. So here's how this works. Galia will have 3 minutes to talk about something that she loves. This can be a person, place, thing, concept, activity, anything she wants. Our only requirement is that he loves it wholeheartedly and wants to tell us why. Are you ready, Galia?
I am so ready.
Good. Got my timer here. Now, what do you love so freaking much?
I love fan fiction, and specifically, I love the concept of openly loving fan fiction. So I'm going to start with a baseline that fan fiction is incredible. It's transformative work. It's getting to read your favorite characters over and over again when you have this amazing emotional attachment to them. It's choosing the kind of story that you want to read based on the tags. It's getting fulfilling emotional arcs for characters you already have an emotional attachment to. It's amazing. But for so long, I felt so embarrassed about loving fan fiction because, well, people make a lot of fun of it. People are like, oh, you read fan fiction, that's really childish, or like, that's super nerdy and cringe. And so I pretended that I didn't love it for a really long time, or I kind of hid it, or when I said that I liked fan fiction, I would say it with a sheepish smile. And it turns out that that's dumb. I just love it. And when I'm open about loving it, then my friends are excited for me too. Even my non-nerd friends, when they're like, what are you up to tonight? And I'm like, I'm reading fan fiction. They're super stoked for me because it's about fulfilling these experiences that I originally got to watch on TV or read on the page. And now I get to emotionally experience it over and over again. And there are so many options. I can read about my favorite characters crying and being hurt, and I can experience emotional catharsis doing that. I can read about my favorite characters having lots of sexy sex, which is always exciting. I can read about them petting cows in the countryside, and it's pleasant and relaxing and exciting, and I get to do that as often as I want. And no, I don't have a giant TBR list, and I don't have 57 books that I'm in the middle of, but I do have a 300,000K fan fiction about my favorite character traveling back in time and learning how to deal with his feelings appropriately. And that's really great for me too. And I love that all of my friends are excited for me. Like, I'll be hanging out at a, grown-up party with cocktails and fancy dresses. And if someone says, what have you been doing for the last week? And I say, I've been working on my own fan fiction. They're like, wow, Galia, I'm so excited you're doing this thing that you're excited about. Basically, it turns out that just hanging out with people who are excited about you being excited for things is an absolute game changer. And when it's fan fiction, this thing that so many people call embarrassing, it's really freeing. And it turns out that I just get to enjoy the things that I want to enjoy without having to feel rueful or sheepish about it is a breath of fresh air. I'm an adult. I'm 32 years old. I have a house and a mortgage and a job. And also, I love reading fan fiction all of the time, and I don't have to be embarrassed about that. I'm just so stoked that every time I watch a new show and it's over, then I get to pull out my phone and immediately open AO3 and go, great, what are these characters doing next? Do I want to watch them falling in love with each other? Do I want to watch them experiencing the same hard things 74 times in a row while I process the hard things that I'm dealing with 74 times in a row? And it's super cathartic and relaxing.
Go ahead and finish your thought.
Just get so happy that I can pull out my phone whenever I want and dive deep into any world that I want to.
That's awesome. Thank you for telling us about fan fiction today.
Happily. As mentioned, I'm very excited about it.
Do you remember how you first got into fan fiction?
Yeah, first getting into fan fiction, I was probably in 6th or 7th grade, and some friend probably introduced me to, I'm sure my sister actually introduced me to fanfiction.net. And my friends and I used to go to the school library and copy and paste fan fictions, put them into Word documents, font size 6, 0 margins, single space, double-sided, and print them out and pass them around like at classes with each other.
Amazing. So what were those first fan fictions in? What story universe?
I think my first fan fictions were mostly Yu-Gi-Oh! And Sayuki, which were anime that I loved when I was younger. And I wrote some fan fiction back then too, which I'm not going to say that I'm ashamed of it, because I just talked about not being ashamed of fan fiction. But I will say that nobody except one specific ex-girlfriend is allowed to read them. And that's because she shared her fan fiction that she wrote when she was also 13 years old.
Being ashamed of something is one thing, but also being aware of this is a thing that I wrote years ago and I have grown quite a bit since then is another thing.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily need everybody knowing what 12-year-old Galia thought sex was supposed to be.
No, probably not. I love how you pointed out that fan fiction allows you to spend more time with characters you love and stories you love and experience fulfilling emotional arcs with these characters you already care about. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, if there's a show that got canceled early, or even one that didn't get canceled early, there's an ending to it. When the creators have finished making it, when you close the book, when Netflix says there are no more episodes, that's what you get. But I fell in love with those characters for 300 pages or 2 seasons or whatever, and I want to get to keep hanging out with them. I made some kind of attachment to them, and I'm not ready to let it go.
And clearly there are a lot of other people who feel the same way about these characters because there's not only people who will read the fan fiction, but people who will write it.
Absolutely. There are thousands of stories of my favorite characters having a good time, having a bad time, falling in love, falling out of love, learning how to be better people, dealing with their struggles. And that means that other people are as excited as I am about them.
Falling in love, but this time in a coffee shop.
Exactly. Or in the exact same circumstances, but with one tiny detail changed that actually flips everything on its head.
Like this time they live.
God, like this time they live. You have no idea how many Everybody Lives alternate universe fics I have saved in my AO3 bookmarks.
Sometimes you just want things to work out, but also you talked about sometimes you want to see emotionally cathartic bad things happen to your characters.
Yeah, if I'm having a rough day and everyone around me is having a good time, that feels kind of incongruous sometimes. And often what I want to do is also read about somebody else having a hard time, either in the same way that I am. Maybe I feel really sick, and so I read a fic about a character I love dealing with similar chronic illnesses to me. Or I am feeling mopey and I want to read this character, I don't know, dealing with a lot of really rough monsters that they have to fight, and they're really upset and struggling with that. And I get to experience that emotional struggle as well, which helps me express my feelings sometimes.
Absolutely. And I know from like my own fan fiction explorations that there are lots of fics of people applying their headcanons or their personal ideas of what these characters are regarding their gender, regarding their sexual and romantic orientations, and using that as a kind of exploration for both writer, reader, and character.
I mean, that's what happened to me over the last couple of years. The last time you introduced me on this podcast, I was identifying as a cis woman, pronouns she, her, and I read a lot of Magnus Archives fan fiction where the characters were transmasculine, and turns out I've got some gender feelings that I don't know if I would have explored if I hadn't read all that TMA fic. I identified really strongly with some of the characters in the show, and then reading fics where they were transmasculine. And I think the authors probably were as well, or at least that's what I've picked up since following all of them on Twitter or connecting with them on other social media. And I read these descriptions of gender experiences that I also felt. And so I would read a character being happy about being masculine in specific ways, or wearing a skirt to work, but everybody still treats that character as a man, or the fact that the clothes that he is wearing or the way that he looks could change from day to day doesn't actually affect what his baseline gender is, was really emotional for me. And it took a while to figure out why I felt so emotional about it. And it turns out the answer was I had some gender feels.
And these very personal expressions and personal experiences that these fan fiction writers are putting out there on the internet, you'd be hard pressed to find them in a traditionally published book.
Oh, goodness, yes. They are not what the publishing industry is generally looking for, or at least hasn't been for most of history. And just because it's not monetizable doesn't mean that we don't need to read it, that we don't need these stories. So the fact that there's a free online repository of them is honestly a gift that I could not begin to express how important it is.
Is there anything that you don't like about fan fiction? And if so, how do you handle that?
Well, There are certainly types of fan fiction that I don't like, and the way that I handle that is by minding the tags. The most common fan fiction website, or the most popular one I might say, is Archive of Our Own, AO3, which has such an incredible tagging system that it won a Hugo for it. And it's done by a remarkable combination of the care and consideration of authors and some volunteers who do tag wrangling. And it means that if there's a kind of content that squicks me out or makes me uncomfortable, it's really easy for me to avoid it, which honestly is easier than library books in a lot of cases. Someone might recommend a library book to me, and halfway through I realize that there's something that makes me deeply uncomfortable. That never really happens with fan fiction because I'm always well warned, or the author can choose not to use archive warnings, and I go into it knowing that it might have content I'm not excited about.
And so it becomes really easy, like you said, to find the kinds of stories you want to read and read them and avoid the ones you don't want to read.
Exactly. It's absolutely a choose your own adventure of the literary type. Well, I guess choose your own adventures are always literary. The responsibility and the joy all falls into my hands.
Galia, thank you so much for telling us about something you love today.
Thank you for allowing me to. I'll talk about fan fiction anytime.
And thank you, our listeners, for tuning in today. If you would like to learn more about being unashamed of reading fan fiction, or our guest Galia, you can find a link to his fanfiction sex ed blog in the episode description. And if you have something you love so freaking much you want to tell me all about it, consider this your invitation to join the show. I Love This Thing So Freaking Much is a production of Through the Window Media. This episode was directed and edited by Sophie A. Katz. You can find us at Through the Window on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or Tumblr. That is THROU the Window at all those social media sites. Be good to yourself, be kind to each other, and you'll hear from us again soon.